Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am your host, Zach Fiorelli. I lead our technology alliances here at 360 Learning. I want to cover, in the spirit of today's webinar, and make sure you get the most out of technology. I want to cover a few housekeeping items to make sure you get the most out of this webinar experience. So if you look along the top and the side, you'll see various windows. You can slide them, resize them, make the most use out of your space. We encourage some chat. Maybe let's get a few chats going. Let us know where you are in the world, where you're attending from. Chat's a great place for you to network. We love to hear your reactions to our topics, but please put your questions in the Q&A section. There's a separate box there for questions and answers. So maybe let's get the chat going and let us know where you're joining from. We'd love to hear where you are, what time of day it is for you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're excited for you to be there. There you go. Welcome, everyone. So also, these webinars can be resource intensive. So if you're having any streaming issues, if you're finding this to be choppy, then please close your apps, close your windows. If all else fails, hit the refresh button. It's kind of like restarting your computer for a webinar. Well, hello from Colorado. I'm from Colorado as well. And England, that's a great one. That is even further. We will provide a copy of this deck as well as a recording afterwards. So you'll get a copy of this. I know that'll probably be the most common question. So remember, let's chat in the chat. Let's keep the networking going, and let's put the questions in the Q&A. We'll have a Q&A session after this. We'll cover some questions as we're going through this content, but really we want to keep the questions out of the chat so that we can answer them. If we don't get to them, we'll send you answers to those questions afterwards as well. All right, so enough of the housekeeping. Everyone's kind of coming in now, so welcome again to the webinar. I am, as I mentioned, my role leading technology alliances at 360 Learning. I really am a technologist at heart. So this challenge really hits home. I realize how complex the technology stack is at companies today, how many different technologies companies have to deal with of all sizes, small or big. And we hear from our L&D community how challenging this technology overwhelming training resource is. And you really cannot get the most out of your investment as a company if you can't effectively empower your employees. And that investment is often a capital I. These are expensive tools. They're not cheap. So let's get into the content, but let me first do some quick intros of our presenters. We'll be joined today by Sean Adams. He leads our Vice President of Revenue at IRAD, one of our strategic alliance partners. IRAD is a technology that we partner with here at 360 Learning to accomplish getting the most out of technology stacks. We'll also be joined by two of our learning practitioners. Graham Montgomery is on our learning engagement consulting team here at 360 Learning. He deals with this daily with our customers, and I would consider him to be an expert in this space of how to enable and get the most out of training when it comes to technology enablement. We'll also be joined by Rich Adams. Rich is a sales enablement consultant. He has also a lot of great experience in this space. He's done this at scale for large companies such as Zoom, trying to get the most out of the tech stack. So without further ado, I will turn over the content to you, Sean, and let you go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. No, Rich and I are not related. We just have common last names, if anybody's wondering. Just happen to be, very passionate about the same technology guides here, as well as sharing a name. So great to be here for everybody. As Zach mentioned, this is an enormous problem that we see in organizations. And one of our real goals here is to help you as L&D professionals and enablement professionals to really empower and unlock the potential and the ROI of one of the major items on most P&Ls, which is the technology stack, as Zach alluded to here. A couple of stats here just to kind of set the tone. It's an enormous problem for organizations. We see on average, a knowledge worker is interacting with something like 10 to 12 tools just to do their job at any given day, right? So imagine 11 tabs on your browser just to do your job, right? This is what most organizations are facing. And Gartner did a study that said about half of knowledge workers really are overwhelmed and unsure how to use technology to do their jobs properly. They know there's all these tools available to them, but they just kind of flock to the stuff that they know because they're not sure how to really unlock it, to use it to better their job, to use things like AI and all the onslaught of information that's coming to them. So we really wanted to tee up a good session today to explain how an L&D professional can use something like a flexible LMS and the right content structuring system to unlock and empower some of this technology for their organizations. I thought we'd start by really just trying to understand first, why do these adoption and utilization efforts fall short? Like, what are the reasons that they happen? We know millions are invested in the technology, but why are they typically ineffective in terms of an adoption strategy, and why organizations are just not using the most of their tools? Probably quite familiar with this specific stat or this flow if you're in L&D or enablement, the forgetting curve. And effectively, it is as new information is presented to a learner, if that information is not applied, you'll see that as time goes on, there's a dramatic decrease in basically the ability to retain that information. And if that application isn't something like using that information, applying it in some way, putting it to work, sometimes as quickly as the same hour as if it was presented in, that information begins to just leave people's minds. We know how much information is out there. So a big thing we're going to focus on today is that strategy, so that we can really understand that humans are going to forget things, right? How do we make it so it's going to align with general human behavior and not really get stuck in this curve that inevitably, these pieces of information can be forgotten about? So I'm going to jump in here and hand it over to Rich to kind of kick things off with our first kind of pitfall to fall into.
Yeah, the learning curve, Sean, is fascinating. It is the unlearning curve or the forgetting curve, depending on how you look at it. It is definitely by far the number one reason why most training fails. But the second, and maybe close to that first, is one really big thing that I've seen over 2 decades in the technology space, and specifically focus on helping go-to-market teams and salespeople who use sometimes upwards of 10, 12, 13 different tools, is oftentimes when we're rolling out these tools, we forget one really important thing is, how is this important to me? Why should I care? Oftentimes it's something that has been pushed down from leadership, say, hey, here's a new tool, here's a new process. But what we forget is actually looking at, well, how does it actually help me? What's the goals and objectives on how this tool is actually going to produce a better outcome, future state than we're at today? And it's by far the number one reason when I work with teams is when I say, hey, tell me about the experience of learning how to use these tools, is the number one feedback I get is they just don't understand why it helps them, right? They've seen the training, they've probably resisted it at times, but they just don't understand how it actually helps them in the role. And this is a really simple switch that you have to make, is focus really deliberate around how it helps each person in the organization by their role, whether they're a frontline worker or they're a leadership, regardless of what those roles are, you have to define how it helps them and make it really clear so they can understand how is it going to better their objectives and their roles themselves. So go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was just going to say, context and clarity are everything here, right? Just like anything else, not designing things in the dark without those frontline managers involved. And how do we really kind of structure this around the why, to Rich's point there? So Rich, I'll let you take it from there. I know you have some good context into kind of the frontline worker and the story that we're involving folks in as a committee and not designing in the dark in the vacuum.
Yeah, so along those same lines of a lot of, we're pushing new technology out, we're excited about it, and we forget this notion, like, listen, we need to bring everybody into the conversation. We need to look at who are our frontline workers that are being impacted, whether it's the whole company, whether it's certain departments that are going to be using this new tool or going through a new process, and get them involved in the conversation early. Listen to their feedback. You're going to find, as you start to get into the trenches and get into the front lines, you're going to start to identify some natural evangelists that you can lean on to help be those change agents. Because rather than just relying on a top-down kind of initiative, you can do more of a bottom-up or a top-down and bottom-up approach, and where you're actually using your frontline, the folks that are the actual users of the software, allow them to be essentially they're the evangelists, the spokes people for this change in the organization. And it's a misstep that most organizations face today. They just don't include them early enough. And then oftentimes they're going back after the fact and say, hey, what happened? And a lot of times they're just not brought into the conversation early enough, and they don't understand, well, what's in it for me and how is it going to help me? And those people, peer-to-peer learning in general is extremely powerful. And if you're not, taking advantage of it, it just puts the entire thing at risk, and you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table.
Yeah, and I know we hear this a lot, and Graham, I'm sure you can speak to this. With 360 Learning, you guys take kind of a line in the sand that even learners should be involved in the creation process of learning content and how they scale out some of that know-how. And it really, helps to build a better culture of inclusion. So anything else you'd add there in terms of just that strategy of getting more folks involved and sort of, taking down the barriers of friction to sharing and collaborating?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for example, we actually have a couple of clients where they actually have a private specialized group on their platform where literally everybody on the platform has authoring access. So you talk about really decentralizing content creation. Obviously, they have a process for review and updating, but the ability to create, a training ecosystem, create ways for people to easily communicate feedback, ideas, et cetera, is utterly pivotal, I think, to a successful training organization. And I think at the end of the day, one thing that I always like to keep in mind is like an open door policy only really matters if there's an open mind behind it. So also being open-minded to different ideas that might come in that might not necessarily align with what you're currently doing, but could at least offer you an opportunity to step back and reevaluate your approach.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, one of the things we focus on, especially from like a tactical standpoint, is really trying to focus when we think about some of that sharing and the insight and feedback that we're eliciting from our groups of stakeholders here, that we're focusing on process when it comes to technology training and adoption and not product, right? I mean, just look at the average, tool or the average approach to something like, a new software guide or a new system that we're trying to roll out. It's typically like a 45-minute Zoom recording, right? We throw that on there and we try to have a catch-all for, hey, here's everything you need to know about Salesforce, as if you could capture all that in one 45-minute, quick session, as like more of a, one-to-many approach, right? We know that those things fall down. They tend to also really focus on product. Here's what this button does. Here's what this section means. Here's what, layout of the tool itself, and really, software terminology versus process terminology. To Rich's earlier points, these folks care about what is in it for them. How is this going to make my life easier? How is this going to speed up how I do things, take things off of my plate, automate elements that are painful for me? That is what we're really trying to elicit and pull out of this training, focused on end to end. How do I get from here to there with this tool? Not here's what this button means, right? Because that's like a feature dump, just like we talk about in the sales, in the demoing experience. We want to make sure we're really driving the flow and the feel of those processes.
Yeah, Sean, it's a good point. There's one thing I would add to that is, during my time at Zoom, some of our teams were using 13, 14, 15 different tools, and one of the opportunities we saw was to, rather than to give them more training and more documentation on these tools, we actually took the opposite approach. We said, listen, if this is the role that they're in, what's the top 5 things that they need to know how to do? Create an FAQ that we would provide them during, using our internal system, where when they're interacting with that tool, they can see, hey, these are the top 5 things I need to know how to do in this tool. And then over time, as they're being onboarded into the company, as they're progressing in their role, we provide more and more additional training, additional documentation that's more contextual to what they're doing. And so in the first 30 days of my job, I don't need to know every single thing there is to do about these tools. I need to know maybe 4 or 5 things that help me achieve the outcomes and goals that I have for my particular role. So less is more, and moving away from that kind of long form conventional training and into more just in time, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, well said, Rich. I think that's a huge component of this. Even here, one of the most viewed guides we have internally for our company is a wiki page for each of our pieces of software that simply just explains like the naming conventions and the color coding for a couple different systems, right? To Rich's point, simple is the answer here, especially early days when people are trying to understand things. If there's a question that feels like it's a dumb question, such as what does X mean in this system, or what does Y type system mean, the the learner just simply won't ask the question. They feel like they're going to look stupid. And so one of the most viewed guides we have is a simple page like this that explains vernacular, terminology, naming conventions, hierarchy in a system. So for example, in Salesforce, these names mean this. And this is sort of the hierarchy of how those things go. It's like a one-page guide. It's very visual. It's color-driven. It breaks things down in very, very simple English so that people know exactly what that means. If I'm moving from HubSpot to Salesforce and HubSpot calls it an opportunity, a deal, and Salesforce calls it an opportunity, even something as small as that can throw off learners, and people could be scrambling around the internet trying to solve their own questions instead of asking. So these guides are like a self-serve way that we can have this. It doesn't all need to be in one giant course they're taking in an LMS, but think of a cheat sheet or a guide or something simple that you can link to that folks can use like a key on a map or just a quick index to try to get anything at any time, not just when they're first learning materials, but when they're in their job and they just forget what something is. They need that referenceability. Yeah. Love that. So as we kind of head on here to our second pitfall, just general resistance to change, right? L&D, by virtue here, it's kind of in the change management business. You're trying to use content to elicit specific behaviors or to really, push adoption of a certain process or a tool or some kind of education in some way, right? And we know human beings are probably going to just lean into what they know. And if they're not involved in that process, or something was sort of dictated and talked down to them on, here's what this new system is, or management says we're buying this new system, and there's no real tie-in for what's in it for me, they're just going to push back. There's going to be a natural inclination to that. So that's a big piece of it. When people get defensive and not adopting the new tech that's available to them, because they just don't see why they need to do that, right? It gets sold as an addition instead of a complement. And with all the training and enablement we're focused on, we have to align these things to be a complement to what they're already doing. What's going to take away steps from my place? What's the thing that I feel like my leadership is looking for inefficiencies and painful parts of my day, and they're trying to put things to remove friction for me, not just put in an extra checkbox to annoy me, right? And there's this narrative that usually comes in with new technology, and this is what leads to poor adoption, because it's just a disconnect with that story piece.
Yeah, Sean. So if everybody on this webinar, we've all been through different rollouts of tools. And one of the things that I've seen happen, both as somebody who is an end user, as well as, somebody involved in that change, is we often use the terminology, hey, this is something that you need to use. We need to utilize this new tool. We need to adopt this new process, versus you get to use this new tool. You get to utilize this new process that is going to unlock more productivity. It's going to reduce time. It's going to help you be more successful in your role. And when you can change the perception from, I have to go use this tool, to I'm excited about it because I know how it's going to help me, it's massive. And second to that, if you can get your frontline leaders, your frontline managers, your direct level supervisors, if you can get them bought in on the change, they are going to be your biggest advocates and force multipliers. Because let's face it, if the boss doesn't care what's happening, and if they're not driving and reinforcing the message, it's probably not going to happen. So really focus on the leaders. Make sure they understand the value, how it affects them as a leader, as well as their team, so they can be that extension and really be that driving force for the overall change. Number one thing there, big missed opportunity for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, and I feel like collaborative authoring can go a long way there, Rich, because, one way that you can get these advocates, right, is to make them part of the training, at least to the extent that they'd like to be involved. And if they are personally invested in the actual content itself, then they're usually personally invested in the outcomes, which of course is the long-term retention of the learning. So I think that's a really good point to bring up.
Yeah, and Graham, one of the things I've seen with several of our mutual customers with 360, I think you could expand upon this, is just even with courseware that we're standing up saying, hey, here's the best practice guides on X system or X set of processes. You usually see a video, a doc, something in the beginning, sort of level setting the why of the entire course or what they're about to go through. and then a good tie-in to a KPI or whatever they call that in their organization, an objective, whatever it happens to be. Now, it's easy in something like sales because it's usually tied to like revenue output, pretty measurable. Mm-hmm. But in other, departments, you'll see things like if it's, decreasing support tickets or improving churn or, improving retention in some ways, whatever those measurable outcomes are, when we're devising these sort of things, that we're actually laying out like, here's why this is important to you. Now we'll get into the sort of how to set the tone. Anything else you'd add there, and just the kind of overview component of this?
I mean, I would say that kind of goes to meeting learners where they are to some degree, and really providing them with, like, I like to describe like kind of the Batman's tool belt, right? No matter where Batman goes and no matter what precarious or interesting situations he gets into, there's somehow a pocket on his belt that enables him to, achieve what he needs to. And then, really going back to the point and meat and potatoes of what you're talking about is, I think a lot of us we plan out the training, we plan out the execution, but we don't necessarily play cleanup. What are we looking to achieve? Not only the KPIs and metrics that would show a learner why this is beneficial, going back to what, Rich's why that he was describing, but also KPIs, maybe for those advocates that aren't involved in training, we can say, hey, these are the improvements. This is where we pushed the needle in the right direction. This is the time it took. And here are the next steps to push it even further.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich,
yeah, Sean, one thing I'd add here too, one of the, so just actually a quick story. And we'll talk about this here in a little bit, in a little bit more detail. But one of the big projects that I was involved in at Zoom was moving the entire company over to a new instance of Salesforce.com, going from Salesforce Classic to Salesforce Lightning. This impacted every single role in the company, which about 90% of the role in the company used Salesforce, but they all used it very, very differently. And there were, as you can imagine, when you run your business on a CRM like that, it's mission critical. So this needed to go exceptionally well. And so when I looked at the adoption strategy, one, how can we anticipate where our users are likely going to run into resistance? So looking at here are your 5, 6, 7, 8 core users. Here are the 5 or 6 core use cases for Salesforce. And then proactively build some content. We used a thing called cheat sheets, which are similar to the FAQs, which is, hey, in this role, here's a cheat sheet on how to use Salesforce. And those cheat sheets were actually built using IRAD. Those were documented tutorials that covered the core basics of it. Now, as great as it was to anticipate as much as we could, we knew that there are situations where we're just not going to be able to anticipate it. We needed to use data in order to track it. And so one of the metrics that we were looking at was how often a user was switching back from Salesforce Lightning to Classic, and actually capturing what page they were on, what their user profile was, and then we're actually required to actually fill out just a short survey to say, hey, what happened? Why did you need to switch back? We actually leverage that data to pick up on trends and themes to then continue to bolster our training documentation, because we're seeing the same user that's getting stuck in the same spot. We could quickly build out those tutorials. And then with some splicing together some other technology, the next time they log in, we could actually serve up that tutorial to them through their browser. And that way, over time, we could see a drastic reduction in the amount of time they were going back to the old system, because now they can self-serve. And that's something we'll talk about here shortly, and Sean's talked about, is the ability to self-serve. And one of the ways to do that is just use the data and analytics to actually track what's actually slowing people down.
And we are talking about some very important and not very fundamental items, right? But I also want to just remind everybody is make the training engaging, right? If a learner has positive expectations because they've been through your training before and found it to be engaging, then they're more likely to want to go into that training, and maybe less resistance, maybe I should say. So I know the age-old adage is make the training fun, but really at the end of the day, engagement is not only helps with learners, having the desire to take the training, but also it does scientifically lend to that long-term retention that we're looking for.
Yeah, and focusing on those quick wins, like we touched on there, tackling FAQs is as simple as it sounds. It's painful for the person receiving the FAQ. It's also kind of painful for the person asking. Like if they just have a simple, quick answer to their thing and they could just move on with their day, it's a quick win. They're like, okay, great. Like, we don't need to talk about this. Cool. Like, you know, the phrase, like, it could have been an email, right? That applies to so many different things in L&D too, where it could have been a simple guide that just got repurposed, to Rich's point, into a guide, or same with you, Graham, just something that is engaging and simple to answer my question. This does not have to be overly complicated. In fact, we all should look for the path of least resistance. We look for those FAQs to start. Those end up being a catch-all for sometimes 60, 70% of the pain that people have with a new system or just an existing system that's not being utilized fully. Heading into this third pitfall here, really the lack of relevance. You'll see we're getting into the tactical side of this now. This one-size-fits-all training, you know, we know that this doesn't resonate for folks. We know that the average knowledge worker, they're not going to connect with content that's just not specifically for them, right? Just think about human behavior. You know, if you have a problem with your dishwasher, are you going to look at the 37-page, you know, text manual and try to convert like what you're reading into something relevant for you? No, you're going to go to YouTube and go, make a dishwasher this problem, right? You want instant, quick, relevant things to your job. And so you'll start to see here that leaning into behavior, making things hyper specific, bite size, this is the sort of stuff that gets very, very helpful for learners, even down to the thing of tying it back to the initial initiative, right? So if I know that management is saying, listen, we're hearing a lot about X process, that Tableau is painful, so or reports are painful, so we're going to use Tableau now. Here's how we're going to start to go about that, and I want to elicit your feedback to do so. Here's some guides to kind of get there. We can start to tell this narrative for our learners. And so role-specific process documentation is a huge piece of this. And if we can use simple tools to start to capture some of that, like we're going to cover here shortly, you'll notice the impact this can have, that we're really making this feel hyper-specific for those end audiences.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I learned really quickly is when you're trying to, especially when you're in a large organization, you've got a lot of different people who are doing different things, but using the same tools. One of the pitfalls is in a lot of the manufacturers, you know, and the OEMs of these tools are going to give you these kind of one-size-fit-all trainings that end up getting repurposed, and they're just not particularly helpful because every single role uses the tool differently. And so when you take the time to not only build the documentation, but prioritize, like I was saying earlier, here are the 5 roles that you're supporting who are using this tool. For each of those 5 roles, what are the key 5 workflows, right? This might only be 3, 4, 5 initially. What are the core things that they need to be able to do? Document that, whether that's through a short form video, if you're using a tool like an IORAD to document through a tutorial. And then one of the things that you could also do too, you know, using an LMS tool or a combination is to build those mini crash courses that are specific to those roles. And so something we'll talk about here shortly is this concept of a blended learning approach. So it's not just doing the long form trainings. It's not just about the tutorials. It's a combination of options that you can give a learner that's going to meet them where they need it most. And when it comes to learning technology in a job specific situation, it's getting their hands on. They don't want to leave the screen that they're on to go watch a video and then get distracted and come back. They ideally being able to serve this up within about 30 seconds of them needing it is key. And so the goal here is to actually simplify the training itself. So identify the role. What are the 4, 5, 6 at most key workflows that they need to be able to accomplish using that tool? And then assemble that and put that in your content LMS system, whatever that you're using in your company.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. And one thing too is I would encourage you as you're thinking about this documentation. Love the idea of it being role specific, but also don't necessarily pigeonhole that documentation or that resource. You want something that can be used alongside the initial training that you're providing, can also be a reference guide. So you don't want those to be able to exist in both of those contexts for your users. And that is going to lead to consistent approaches, right? Because if everybody's doing something differently, I think that's going to raise some red flags. But I think we allow that in our organizations more than we think we do, as long as it's getting the same result. But lo and behold, I've been in organizations where we're teaching how to create a ticket in Salesforce. Well, all of a sudden there's some information that's not tied to these tickets and we don't know why. and we can't really figure it out. So now we're trying to do this root cause analysis. We don't really have an A/B comparison. Everybody should be doing this the same way, but people are doing it differently. So who's our culprit, right? What department is our culprit, et cetera? So it's great for training. It's great for longevity of the processes, and also great for root cause analysis as you're figuring out what might be going on, what might be going awry.
For sure, yeah. You can see the call out there for number 3 on micro learning, and I think that's a really good tie into what we consider the learner progression, specifically with tech stack adoption and utilization here. And to your point, Graham, this idea of having bite-sized, micro learning, obviously we know from a pedagogical learning perspective, people want short bursts. One, because they have short attention spans, and all these other tools out there have made that so that the attention spans are going down at anything. But secondly, it also helps you for referenceability, if that's a word. And to your point, it's not just when I'm initially maybe onboarding as a new employee for an organization or onboarding a new software for the first time, right? Most of the LMS content we see out there tends to be very heavily focused on a one-time event of here's how you get up to speed, quote unquote, with Salesforce or whatever the tool happens to be. But that's really not relevant for how a learner experiences information, right? They have the net new experience of that new process or system, and using different mixed medias that we'll cover here, that obviously helps them to engage and consume the content. But think about the forgetting curve, right? The further they go away from that initial training, the less amount of time they're going to adopt that if they're not applying it. And so thinking about those micro learnings, not just in the first experience with this, but now maybe they want to simulate. They want to put their hands on things and click around. I always use the analogy, I love to golf. I watch a YouTube video, right? If I just watch the video, then go onto the course for a real round and try to have the stuff that went into my head on a video automatically make it into my hands, like that's not going to happen, right? There has to be a reinforcement layer. I have to practice it. I have to get a feel and flow for these things. So simulations and getting muscle memory down is really helpful in that initial kind of strengthening of this skill set. And then as they get into the flow of their work, we want that same content via cheat sheets, via simple guides and links, really accessible. So when I'm in Salesforce and I have that question, I'm not going through a 27 module course to find an answer to something, right? I'm referencing that same guide that was given to me in the in my initial onboarding, but I'm able to pull it up in a second because it's super easy to search, super easy to pull in, and it's 5 steps or 20 steps, something very simple versus the long-winded approach that we typically take to onboarding that doesn't really comply with as we go down the learning curve. As we're wrapping up here, getting a little more tactical on the actual formats themselves, we know that formatting is very, very important here, specifically when we talk about the technology adoption side for driving engagement. Things like PDFs, long-winded videos, static documents, screenshots, things like this. You're talking about a live, interactive, dynamic piece of software, and then you're looking at a picture of a screen to learn, right? You wonder why there's a disconnect for people. There needs to be something that involves them in the process and lets them simulate those experiences and help kind of build that muscle memory so that that content feels like they're a part of it, like they've already been kicking the tires a bit. Why do you think the rise of things like free trial software have been so popular, right? People want to just try it out and see if they like it, and then they'll continue to pull the thread to learn more on it.
Sean, we've also seen over the last, I guess almost 5 years now, since it's 25, in 2020 when the pandemic hit, it forced a lot of companies to be remote, and a lot of those companies are still remote today. And learning how to do anything remotely when you're used to being able to shoulder tap inside of an office, now you're sitting in a home office, it's a lot more difficult. And the challenge is it might take me a long time to get an answer from somebody. And so now, because we live in this highly virtual digital world, being able to serve up content, training content in contextual capacity to people who are working from home is absolutely massive. And they, in the old days, all you needed to do is just walk 2 or 3 cubes down and somebody could probably help you. Now you got to try to get a hold of somebody on Slack, set up a meeting, whatever it might be. So it's so important now to be able to improve productivity by just making this training available and really just in time, for so many different roles that work from home.
Yeah, these things are super easy to say and verbalize, right? We understand that it's not super simple to wave a wand and have all of this content hyper specific to every single person. But what we're trying to do is just set the tone that, there's a strategy that can be employed here, and then involving the right tooling to help you execute on some of these things. So one of the big ones is just multiple modalities. We know from a pedagogical learning perspective, the more formatting we can have, multiple modes, hearing, seeing, trying, reading aloud in text, the more we can surround folks with those different sensory elements, the deeper they're going to basically adopt these different strategies in the learning materials. And also being able to format to the different learning types. I mean, one of the most painful things in L&D is people learn differently. Some people are audible, some people need to try it. Being able to cater to those things is kind of fundamental to this. And we want to try to use tooling that's available and things like AI to speed up doing this, because we know it's important. But as we'll see here shortly, we know that one of the biggest gaps is just like resourcing to actually get it done. And we want to make it personalized, but not at the expense of this being an enormous resource-heavy endeavor. We have to kind of, toe that line a bit and make sure that the process adoption is aligned to our objectives, but can't be a huge cost center as well as we go through.
Yeah, just a great call out there, Sean. I appreciate that so much. So many clients say, I want to create these videos. And I think in their mind, they're thinking of some of the things they've seen on LinkedIn Learning. And I think I'd remind us is that, it's not just can be a time suck to create those, but it's also a financial endeavor in a lot of cases when you're talking about high quality content. And at the end of the day, I almost guarantee you that within just a few months, there's at least one thing that needs to be updated in that video. And if it's a continuous video, guess what? The whole thing needs to be done or be cut and edited. So just not exactly scalable. I definitely wouldn't describe it as such. So keep it simple. Of course, IRAD gives those hands-on tutorials, but tutorials in general are what learners want to see. Camtasia did a study and they see around 83 to 86% of people prefer a tutorial video or like an interactive follow along than a wall of text. And I think we go, well, duh. But think about that. That's more than 8 out of 10 people. So that's not really a question. We desperately need to cater to that group of folks because it is the majority of the learners that we're reaching out to.
Absolutely. The context there, getting them involved in the process. Absolutely. But again, to our point, we know that this is also typically with manual processes very painful to go and do, huge resource commitments here. So one of the things we're looking at is trying to, again, show you some of the tooling and the best practices here to focus on the low-hanging fruit and to make sure that we are keeping in mind things like version control, Graham, to your points, making sure we have a process in which we can keep tabs on this stuff so it doesn't become, purgatory of content editing, right? We want to make sure that there's some kind of reasonable process that we're not spending all of our time trying to edit everything, each and every month. With products specifically, obviously those things, the UIs change, the buttons change. And so that means our learning has to change. Using simple ways that segment those things to make it very easy to be able to change. That's really where we're focused on, to make sure that the L&D team isn't incurring more work here. And one of the ways we think about this is the SME relationship, the subject matter expert collaboration component. This is a great place to start to really get tactical results out of this. And so one of the pieces that we really focus on is this concept called SME extraction. Effectively, just how do we close the loop between the L&D person who's designing the learning experience and those that actually have the subject matter expertise. Especially in something like tech stack training, you've got folks in maybe the finance and HR and IT and all these sort of tangential toolings that are involved with your learner base, but the L&D team is not an expert in all these tools, right? They know pedagogical learning and how to structure these experiences. How do you involve the SME without being effectively like an order taker or like an interviewer where you're just sitting on a call, pinging them with questions endlessly, right? It puts L&D in this backseat kind of approach and power dynamic. It also puts a bunch of stress and pain on the SME. So one of the things we focus on is tooling that can extract the know-how from an SME through a capture process, through basically pulling out stuff they already do. These processes already exist. Can we just have an easy way for the SME to describe the click paths or to actually do them? And then L&D can clean those things up, can make sense of them, can segment, can have a process and a program for how we can send those out into consumable learning content. So the SME isn't the one on the hook for those things, but they can still put their flair and expertise in the mix without it being extra work for them. Again, just extracting that know-how in a really consumable way.
Yeah, I kind of think about maybe going to IKEA and buying some furniture, and you're the SME is that one person on the side who's just handing L&D the tools as they're asking for them, right? L&D has the instructions. They're technically building everything, but they're requiring SMEs to give them just the pieces that they want, as opposed to, I'm working on this one part of the project. How about you work on this other part of the project, and we can bring this together? And really making sure that you're also identifying like how involved that SME really wants to be. So just like we want to meet the learners where they are, we want to meet the SMEs where they are, empower them to be able to do these things. But to the extent that, you know, they want to be involved, maybe they only really want to provide those tools and parts to you, but maybe they want to actually start building with you as well. And I think creating that cohesive collaborative environment is really, really great for creating relationships. I bet there's one person on this call who feels like there is a barrier between them and their managers and their SMEs, but actually truly getting them involved can break that down.
Well said.
Perfect. So, Sean, do you want me to go on? You want to intro this?
Yeah. I was just going to say, Graham, I know you got a really good example that I think might help really pull on the thread of this SME extraction piece. Can kind of show this in real time here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, here we also want to include the idea of IRAD as part of a multimodal approach. So a lot of times what I'll see within organizations is that they have tools, but maybe those tools aren't working cohesively with each other. They're not enabling SMEs and managers to contribute to the content creation. So, you know, when you start really approaching things with a multimodal approach, you're catering to different learning styles. You're increasing long-term retention by increasing engagement and comprehension. You're wanting to make sure you're creating flexible and scalable training that really speaks to the learners themselves, and that's very adaptable for the different situations. So wanting to make sure that we show you an example, you know, like as Sean is saying, where we see some different tools as they work together to battle that forgetting curve with repetition reinforcement and maybe even some accountability. So here I'm just sharing my screen. Oh, cool. Looks like it just loaded here. So this is a learner perspective from just on a 360 learning course. So here on the course overview page, nothing new here, folks, right? Where we're introducing what the course is about, the training is about, leading with the why, listing out learning objectives. Hey, what are we going to accomplish by the end of this? But now you'll see we're able to combine different modes of learning for the learner. Once again, presentation of some information, nothing necessarily new there, but making sure we're chunking information and based off of concepts. But then we also want to make sure we're getting into an interactive way to teach this. So, you know, here we actually are presenting a recording of the same steps that we just outlined in a downloadable cheat sheet, right? So we're giving them something to help them train and get trained up on this net new learning, but we're also providing the ability for them to download and reference to it later. Now we're also giving them the ability to see these actions in a cohesive linear manner. Now, also the next activity will show us the actual IRAD itself. So we're able to actually go in and as a learner and follow the same steps that I just watched. So we're getting that repetition, we're getting some reinforcement on the steps I need to take. Annotations can be added here to remind or reiterate value or the whys behind the steps that are being taken. Now, obviously, we want to add in, if we can, some gamification. So, right, we listed out the steps. We talked about the value, the why. We showed them how to do it. We had them walk through it. Now we have some gamification to test that knowledge. So we're saying, you know, hey, we just showed you. Now you show us, where do we click to start a new email template in this particular case? So the learner is able to click on the screen, submit. If it's correct or incorrect, get that feedback. And then, of course, if you do also have our coaching solution, the platform can also enable you to do asynchronous training, asynchronous continuous learning. So we've shown them how to do it in multiple ways. We've given them references for training as they're learning it, but also reference after they've learned for that just-in-time approach. And then now we're also really, really leveling it up. We're giving our organization the ability to asynchronously assess if this person understands the steps that they need to take, the why behind it. We're also giving our assessors, our instructors, the ability to be aligned in their approach in evaluating these submissions. And one thing that I absolutely love about the IRAD extension is that you can create these directly from within a course. So here I'm adding an activity. If we were to go and just do something really, really, really simple and maybe teach some folks how to Google image search. So we'll just head over to our Google tab, start capturing. We'll make this short and sweet. Nice little countdown to make sure we're prepared. Now I'm simply just showing a learner how to do an image search on Google. So it's recording all of these different actions, showing the learner how they can maybe download, go to the website, etc. Once we're done, hit done as you would guess. We can preview, edit, add those annotations. But once we've completed the review cycle, we just simply hit complete. Now it's saving it, and it's going to add this directly into the course. Every time I do this, I'm like, that was way too easy. But as you can see, we can quickly create a tutorial for our learners. And you saw those steps. You can enable many of your SMEs, if not all of them, many of your managers, if not all of them, to come in here and record their screen for these steps, create these types of tutorials. And you can even set it up so you can say, hey, you throw in the meat potatoes and I'll beautify it. I'll make this more engaging. I just need the actual facts and objective approaches from you.
Yeah.
You really see there how everything combined. We've talked about repetition, we've talked about reinforcement, we've talked about just-in-time learning. So we saw within a course, we've actually been able to accomplish all of those. The last call out, and it's something that I've wanted to add on a few different slides, not going to lie, but I think right now is the best time, is accountability, right? You talked about an adoption approach. That is one place where companies fall short consistently. They put all of this work in training people how to do things, their managers, their ground level employees, but they don't create that final factor of accountability. Say, hey, are you actually using this? Are you actually using it the right way? And I know y'all, it can be painful during that phase, but you will thank yourself later on when everybody is doing things as they need to make sure you're a cohesive team. And once again, pushing that needle in the right direction.
Excellent example, Graham. Yeah, I think standardization there is enormous, and pulling it back to a level of accountability, like you mentioned, just making sure that they have truncated tooling and push everything back to, hey, this is the consistent process. We can now evaluate where you're going off track. And one of the things we want to do to wrap up here is actually showing a real case study. I have Rich kind of go through his example at Zoom. This was actually during COVID times, so probably the most stressful a SaaS or scaling company could possibly be, running a remote video tool at the time of COVID. And so, Rich, I'd love you to kind of explain kind of your story there in these exact.
I'll set the stage a bit, and I kind of teased a little bit of this earlier on. Like, listen, heading into this massive Salesforce Lightning migration project, we were at a point where we had tried all the long videos and relied heavily on, long form training, and it just wasn't working. And with a massively growing organization with a ton of tools and a ton of complexity, like, we needed to really shift how we thought about enabling our team on the tech stack across the entire company. And probably one of my favorite days at Zoom is when I stumbled on IRAD, when we were looking for a tool that could help us build a just-in-time strategy by documenting and building tutorials to cover all of our major use cases, in this case for Salesforce Lightning, but all the other tools that plugged into it. And so, as you can imagine, when you've got several thousand people in your organization with all different requirements, there is nothing feasible about being able to train every single one of them on every single possible way that they're going to use Salesforce. And so, as we kind of shared earlier in the hour, the key here was to prioritize by the role. What are the main things that I need to be able to do in my role inside of Salesforce? And now we have such a great tool like an IRAD. We were able to give all the other SMEs access to the tool to be able to document the things that they already know that they're doing. So they essentially overnight became this extension of the learning L&D and enablement team by basically documenting all the workflows that the various roles would need to know how to do. And then we assembled it in a very much of a blended approach. So we had these tools inside of or tutorials inside of our LMS, which is more of a conventional training was happening. We serve these up through a browser extension. So imagine if you're in Salesforce and you're stuck, and within a click of a button, it could see what page I'm on and serve up the right tutorial. And within 30 seconds, I'm on my way. But one of the things that we really did as a paradigm shift, as is the approach to the live training. So heading into this project, one of the things that I was asked to do was, well, we need to put together a training plan for the whole company. So we're going to need you to run all these trainings for all these different groups in the organization. And I said, well, I'm not sure if that's really going to work. And here's why. The forgetting curve says that they're only going to remember maybe 10 or 15% within a week. And frankly, it's not the most effective way for people to learn how to do their job. And there's just too many people to do it. And so I said, what if we flipped this on its head and said, what if we used the live training sessions to actually teach people how to use the tutorials and how to self-serve to learn as they're in the tool? Because listen, nobody wants to go to a training and then go back to Salesforce, whatever tool they're in, and try to remember what they had. They want to have it at their fingertips. They want it contextual. They want it just in time. So we taught them how to serve themselves, taught them how to learn learn the process, learn the workflows by the role, because as we know, everybody's going to learn at a different pace. Some people are going to pick this up fast. Some people are going to need a lot more reinforcement. And so the key was to build a blended strategy. And so because of the success of this, we drastically reduced the time that we thought it was going to take to make the transition. We were able to track week over week the amount of people who were flipping back to the old version, because that was available for the first couple months, or for the first month, I should say. And so we were able to actually speed up the adoption process by not doing more training, but by documenting the process using IRAD, building the tutorials and serving them up in a way that was valuable to them. And this really just cemented the strategy that was used for many other massive change management initiatives, big changes to how we were doing quoting and proposal generation, a lot of other massive overhauls to our process and tech stack. During the pandemic, we had to fundamentally change how we're even quoting and putting together orders, just because of the magnitude of volume. Without a solution like this, it would have been really difficult to be able to push out those updates to the field in real time. Imagine thousands of people spread across the entire globe, and we had almost daily triage trying to fix different problems that were happening related to the organization, and being able to quickly document, make changes. So when something changed, we didn't have to go recreate that video. We could literally just make the update and then republish those tutorials, put them in our CMS, into our LMS, and our various systems, send them out through chat, email, etc. So this cemented the which I was, at the time I was making a big bet on this strategy, but it has really paved the path for many great rollouts after. And it's part of my, tool bag today, something that when I work with organizations, I take a lot of the lessons here and I apply it, and it's given a great framework to really change the game and really, fundamentally shift how we think about driving adoption of a tech stack.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Rich. That's a phenomenal story. Just wrapping up here, I know we got a couple minutes left. We'll leave some room for Q&A. Lastly, just to kind of put a bow on this, our goal here is really, again, help you to become value extractors, not order takers as L&D professionals. We want to make sure that you're able to look at being a profit center for the organization, not a cost center. One of the biggest ways to do that is to attack this large budget line item of these technology tools, show that the LMS and the cheat sheets and the L&D content can actually drive and scale out know-how and effectiveness for our organizations. So as we wrap up here, I want to leave some time for Q&A. Zach, I think you had a couple of questions come in the chat.
I did. Yeah, thank you. Great content. Appreciate that, everyone, all the presenters. So I think one of the questions that looked interesting here to me that I'd like to hear from you guys is what are kind of the existing resources or strategies you do for that with them when it comes to achieving these training objectives, right? What's in it for me? Why am I taking this training? I'd be curious to hear what you guys have experienced and how do you tackle that challenge?
One thing that I would say, and this is pretty simple, it might be what some people on the call are already doing, but I think sometimes as L&D, we like to sit in a room with each other and go, why should this be important for them? And the reality is we're going to come up with a lot of good and accurate answers, but I think shadowing someone reviewing their processes and seeing where they get frustrated. Before you even have that call with each other, deep diving in to see what managers are hearing from their folks, especially when you talk about removing roadblocks as opposed to, hey, this will be cool, this will be fun, this will be of value to you for these metrics. That's really what we view our organizations like, and driving our organization. So I would say get really down to a kind of a grassroots level, and get that feedback from your folks, so that way you can translate that into bringing value into their role using these tools. I don't have, just to that question, I don't have personally a resource on me. However, I can see if any of my other cohorts do, and if so, I can send that over to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Graham. One that Katie addressed, but it might be good to read out loud just so people understand. Is IRAD creating just SCORM files or content? And Katie addressed this well. Maybe I could just read this one quickly. You know, we try and shift the approach from not creating SCORM files, but more, and where you saw that integration with Graham's demo, is more embedding this integration into a 360 learning course or into a course in your LMS, so that you are keeping those things up to date, and you're not kind of stuck on that more traditional approach, which is just creating these SCORM files that can get outdated quickly. It can be exported out. That's what Katie answered, but we're trying to shift it to more of an embedded approach into learning. And
I would just say, Zach, I think that's spot on, and agree with you. I know there might be some of you that are forced to use SCORM, so you might not necessarily, your hands might be a little tied with that. So I do want to call out that you can use the integration. When I created that IRAD tutorial, it's not only embedding it directly on the platform, but now that source of truth, that file, lives on my IRAD dashboard, which can then be embedded elsewhere. So if you are forced to use SCORM, you can use that file, and depending on what SCORM provider you are leveraging, you can actually embed the IRADs into a SCORM file in a lot of different cases. So just in case that's the context you're working with.
Yeah, last thing I'd add on there is just version control. Cannot stress enough how much these technology tools change. And so if you're building things and you're downloading them SCORM, every time there's a minor change, you're then going back, having to delete out that downloaded file, re-download, and then that puts you in that state of change again. And so the bigger play here is really focusing on embed, quick impact, quick FAQs. And with embeds, you can make one change on the tutorial itself and it automatically updates, right? There's no version control that you really need to track.
Okay, and then maybe one last question, which may be more of a follow-up to get into the details of this. We don't answer it, but the question is around what's been the most successful tools been set up for training providers using 360 Learning to create and track users. I'll touch on this quickly, and then Graham, you comment. There's a lot of tracking and reporting inside of 360 Learning. It gets very granular to what you need. If there's a specific question there, I would suggest put it again in the Q&A if you ask that, or reach out to us and we'll try and address. But Graham, would you say creating and tracking users inside our platform is primarily going to be used through the reporting tools and analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. There are static dashboards. There are new custom dashboards coming down the pipeline. There are custom reports that can not only be created for yourself, but can be automatically sent on a cadence that you choose to other folks in your organization that are on the platform. I would say if you need more than that, which I haven't had a client say that they necessarily need more, it's just that how they want it presented or they want it integrated with another application like UKG, et cetera. Of course, we have integrations that can help you, reformat how the metrics are provided, et cetera.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Graham, Rich, Sean, the unrelated Adams, appreciate that very much for the content. I want to give a quick plug here. We at 360 Learning have been doing a virtual event series. This is basically like all of our L&D knowledge and our customers get together and share best practices. We have a fantastic lineup here of virtual events. We encourage you to register for this. It will be starting in March. This is the QR code. You'll get a copy of this deck after this presentation. You'll get a copy, you'll get a video recording as well emailed to you. But I would encourage you to sign up for L&D Next. You'll get a lot out of this virtual event series. With that, we say thank you. Appreciate you spending time with us today, and we hope that you learned something here today with us. And everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.